Warning: some contents may be disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. Let me start this story by telling you a bit about myself. My name is Jake, I'm 26, and I work in accounting. I came from a pretty poor family, so growing up, I didn't have a lot of things that most people my age had. But when I was 18 and I was getting ready for university, my parents and I decided that at this point, I needed a laptop. But since they were really expensive, we decided to look for a second-hand one. So every day after my summer job, I would browse Craigslist for something around my price range that was still usable. After a few days of browsing, I found a 2007 Dell that wasn't completely outdated. I contacted the vendor to see if it was still available, and to my luck, it was. We worked out a date for me to check it in person and then potentially buy it. Then when the day came, I got dropped off by my dad at the seller's residence while my old man waited in his pickup. He was trying to help me get out of my shell since I was a shy kid growing up, so he often made me do things on my own so I could get some more self-confidence. I knocked on the door and waited, and after a moment of silence, I could hear a kid yelling from the other side of the door, only for it to be opened by a man in his mid-30s. He smiled and asked how he could help me, and I introduced myself and told him that I was here to check out the laptop that he was selling. He said, "Oh, of course. I just need to grab it. Do you want to come in or do you want to wait on the porch?" I told him that I'd be fine waiting on the porch. He nodded and told me that he would be right back before closing the door. After about a minute, the man opened the door, laptop in hand, and sat down in one of the chairs as he booted up the computer. It turned on perfectly, and then he handed it to me. I opened Internet Explorer to check if everything worked, and seeing the window open and connect, I was very satisfied. This would do the job. I handed him the money before I got up with my new laptop. And as I was walking down the driveway, the man called out to me. I turned around confused, thinking, did I do something wrong? I looked back at him to see him holding a cable. "You're probably gonna need this too," the man said with a smile. And I felt my cheeks turn red from embarrassment. I had completely forgotten about the charging cable, and I awkwardly walked back up to him as he handed it to me and shook my hand. "I'll let you keep that for free," he said with a chuckle. I then nodded before speed walking to the truck. My father was waiting there, and I got in his pickup and then closed the door. I put on my seatbelt and I held the laptop close to my chest as we drove off. Once we were home, I went to my bedroom with my laptop to mess around with it and get comfortable using it. But after a few minutes, I realized that the man hadn't deleted any of his personal files from the laptop. I was going to delete them then and there, but something caught my eye. It was a folder simply labeled as Future Family, and then it got off. I assumed that the incomplete word was family, but future family? That didn't make any sense. The preview in the folder had trees in it, so it probably wasn't anything about family planning, was it? Feeling guilty about snooping around through such a nice man's private photos, but I was curious as to what it meant. I opened the folder, and what I saw was a picture of a woman sitting in a park. She wasn't really facing the camera. If anything, she didn't acknowledge its existence. A very artsy pose, I guess. I pressed the arrow key to the next photo, in which the same woman, or at least I think it was the same woman, was walking down a street and her back was to the camera. Why would someone take a picture of her walking down the street? I moved to the next photo. This one was a photo of her, still in the same outfit at a door, hunched over it as if she was unlocking her door to get into the house. Given that there was less lighting in this photo, I would assume that it was evening. The photo was taken from far away. About a quarter of the image was covered by a wall, as if the photographer was hiding behind it as they took the photo. This is starting to get creepy. Was the old dude who sold me this a stalker or something? Thoughts of what happened to this poor woman filled my mind as I continued to look through the photos. One of her eating at a cafe, another of her working at a store, a few of her in a library. Then, another which scared me more than all the others combined. A picture of this brown-haired woman, asleep in her bed. He got into her home. What was he going to do with her? What did he do to her? And with a lump in my throat, I pressed the right arrow key again to find a picture of her with a man. Was it him? It looked kind of like him. This time, the woman was smiling at the camera alongside the man, only for the next one to be of her sleeping again. As I filtered through the photos, there were photos of them together, at first scarcely, but as I moved further through them, there were more and more photos of them together. Then, at the near end of the photos, at picture 352 of 364, was a picture of the woman showing off a wedding ring to the camera, followed by one of them together and a few wedding photos, and lastly, a picture of the two of them holding a newborn child. Their newborn child. I felt a pang of guilt once more, but at this point, the man had aged to the point in which I couldn't tell if he was indeed the same person who sold me the laptop. He was his wife's stalker. I felt conflicted as to what I should do. I can't just leave this information to myself, right? But what would I even say? Would I say, hello ma'am, sorry to bother you, but your husband actually stalked you before you two started dating each other? I looked back at the last photo as the small child in the photo, and I remembered hearing a kid's voice from inside their house, probably a toddler, given the date of the photo. And with a deep breath, I did a system wipe of all the data on the laptop before going to dinner, just hoping to forget it. And fortunately, it's been nearly 8 years since then, and I still haven't gotten it out of my mind. Did I do the right thing? Hi, I'm Lisa and I'm 27 and female. I've been on this subreddit for a while now, and I've decided to share my own story. This happened 5 years ago. I had recently moved into my new apartment, which was further from my job, but given my lack of driver's license and how dodgy the public transport is in Detroit, I decided to just get a bike, since it wouldn't be too far. So, I opened my laptop and I started browsing Craigslist for a used bike to see if I could get any good deals. After finding a few I was interested in, I decided to give the owners a call. The first one had recently sold his bike and had yet to take the ad down, but the second bike I was interested in was available. I asked about the condition it was in, and the seller offered to let me see it in person before I made any sort of deal. I agreed and I told him that I'd be there tomorrow at around 4 p.m. to look at the bike and then make my decision. And so the next day at 4, I arrived at his residence. It was a small flat with a silver car parked in the driveway. I walked up to the door and I rang the doorbell. And after a few seconds, a man opened the door. He was a tall, thin man with shoulder-length brown hair. He was wearing a white shirt with a stain on it, as well as a pair of jeans. "Hi," I said. "I'm here to see the bike. Are you Carl by any chance?" And the man smiled and said yes before exiting his household, and then he closed the door behind him. As he led me to his garage, he kept looking back at me. He said, "You know, you're pretty cute, Lisa." I didn't really know how to respond to that, so I tried to change the subject by asking about the bike. He opened the garage to reveal a cluttered space, and from it, he pulled out the bike and rolled it into the yard. "For your viewing pleasure, beautiful." Of course, I was really weirded out, but the bike looked really good for the price he was asking, so I just grit my teeth and bared it as I checked the state of the bicycle. After inspecting the bike, it seemed to be in really good condition, and with my mind made up, I turned to him and asked if he was still okay with the price he posted. But as I turned, I noticed him really close to my face. I flinched and I backed up a bit, but he didn't even react. He stared me dead in the eyes and said, "Well, how about this? You go on a date with me, and I'll give it to you for free." I was starting to get a really bad vibe from him, so I fished out the $50 from my purse and I handed it to him, hoping that he would get the message. But he barely acknowledged it. "Does Saturday sound good to you? I'll pick you up." He clearly wasn't taking the hint, so I took another step back from him and I said in a firm voice, "No, thank you. I'm not interested." And I handed him the money. He stared at me for a moment, and in that silence I felt scared. We were alone in his yard, and he was standing between me and the road, and he was much bigger than me. Thankfully, he let out a sigh and then took the money. With that said and done, I took the bike and walked it out of his property as fast as I could before getting on and cycling away. And as I did, I vaguely heard him saying, "See you later, Lisa," as I sped off, but I didn't really care. All I cared about was putting as much distance as I could between me and him. Once I had made it to my block, I felt the comforting sense of home. Feeling protected, I pulled in, but that was just wishful thinking. As I parked it at the bike rack for my apartment and I walked up to my room, I realized that my phone had been going off the whole time, and given that I was writing and in a less ideal mindset, I probably just didn't notice it until now. When I checked my phone, I saw 9 text messages from Carl Euler. My heart dropped. I could feel my heart hammering in my chest as I checked what he texted me, and I realized now my mistake. But at that time, I wasn't thinking about anything other than what kind of weirdo I just bought a bike from. And as I opened them, a little checkmark appeared below his message. My eyes grew wide as I came to the realization that he now knew that I had looked at them. He sent another text, a simple, "See you Saturday." I immediately scrolled up to see what he wrote. "Hey, it's Carl. So, are we still on for this weekend? I know, you're just trying to start things out on the wrong foot and not take advantage of me. You're so thoughtful. But I don't mind. I know you're a good girl who's gonna treat me right. I'll be sure to treat you for the $50 though. Are you still on your way home? Lisa? And then, the last text after he saw that I checked them, it said, "See you Saturday." I blocked the number and hoped that that would be the end of it. And I spent the next few days trying to forget about it. But his last message, "See you Saturday," was stuck in the back of my mind. That morning, I looked out of my door suspiciously. He doesn't know where I live, but paranoia seemed to be getting the better of me. And seeing nothing, I chastised myself for being so childish, and I went on my way to the store. It was only on my way back did I realize that my fear was right. Right there, on the front of my apartment building was Carl. He was just standing there on his phone. That was until he saw me. A wide smile spread across his face as he looked at me and said, "Lisa, hey, I'm here for our date. Did you get my text?" he said as he walked towards me. I unconsciously backed away, shaking my head no and holding my grocery bags tightly. I could feel myself shaking as he approached me. But just as he approached me, I heard another voice from behind me. "Hey, is there a problem here?" I turned my head slightly to the left to see my neighbor Daniel walking up beside me. He looked at me with concern before looking back to Carl. "No problem, just here for my date," he said, looking expectantly at me. And no longer alone, I slightly felt safer, and I said aloud, "No, I don't want to go on a date with you. Please, leave me alone." I tried standing a bit taller to sound more stern, but Carl wasn't having that. Come on, Lisa, don't be like that," he said, trying to get closer, but as he took a step, Daniel moved in front of me, looking him dead in the face. "You heard her, buddy. She's not interested." Daniel was a pretty big guy with a good build, so he was towering over Carl as they locked eyes. And after a few agonizing seconds, Carl nodded before leaving. Me and Daniel both let out a sigh of relief as he turned the corner on the block before he turned and asked if I was okay. I said I was fine, and after that, I never saw Carl again, and I hope that I never will. This all happened back somewhere around 2017. I had just turned 18 that year, and I was trying to save up money to get my own place. And not necessarily because I wanted to, but because I was the youngest of 4 boys, and I think my parents were at a point where they just really wanted me out of the house. Not trying to complain about my parents, but they were a bit pushy about me getting money and getting the hell out. I had a job, it just didn't pay well, and I was still trying to figure out what I was going to do for college, about my career, and all of that. Honestly, it's not important, but it kind of frames what was going on in my life. Because my parents wanted me gone, and they had given me a pretty tight time frame as to when they wanted me out, I was doing almost anything that I could to get money. It was around Christmas time, and thankfully, I did have a few avenues to get money saved up. Like I said, I had my job, and that was covering most of the necessary expenses. And every time anyone asked what I wanted for Christmas, my response was, $50. Mostly joking, of course. That said, I also had a few things that I could sell, but that was supposed to be my last resort. The week before Christmas, I kind of hit that last resort. Like I mentioned, my parents wanted me out pretty quickly, and they were pushing for me to find a place the first week of January. I was getting there, but I needed a little bit more. So, I moved on to selling my electronics, which is something an 18-year-old never wants to do. I sold my old laptop for $100, and I sold my brother's old Nintendo consoles for a bit of money. And I ended up at a point where I was listing my PS4 Pro, which was my prized possession. Thankfully, they were harder to find in my area, so I was able to list it on Craigslist for $500 with the extra controllers and a few games, and I was willing to be talked down to $400 if it really came down to it. I only needed about $200 at this point, but it's obviously better to have more than what you need in these situations. Within a couple hours of me listing it, I got several messages from people that were obviously scammers and spammers. But there were also a few people messaging me asking if they could get it for $100 because they had a sick kid that really needed it for Christmas and it could be their last one. Look, I'm all about helping out sick kids, but using that as a reason to talk a seller down to 20% of their asking price is just really low. I got another message from one guy that asked if I was willing to come down a bit on the price. I assume it was going to be another sob story about a sick kid, and he was going to try to lowball me hard. It seemed like that's how it was going to go when he mentioned it was something that he wanted so he could play some games with his 8-year-old daughter and her mother. But then, he actually came back with a modest request. $50 off. He would be able to give me $450 in cash that day if I was willing to meet up with him in public. I know, it's not smart to just take the first good-sounding offer. But within 4 hours, I had gotten over a dozen sob stories and twice as many bots. I was seriously done with this already. I responded and told him that it was his, and I asked where he wanted to meet up. He responds thanking me and telling me that they would be able to meet me up in a parking lot of a hotel that was around 5 or so miles away from where I lived. I was a bit confused on why he would want to meet in a hotel parking lot, but at the same time, I wasn't about to question the choice. It was still in public, and hotels have cameras. Plus, there would likely be people around. I packed up the system with the extras all nicely in a box. I tossed it in my passenger seat, and I told my mom where I was going, and then I headed out. I got out to the hotel in question, and I parked. Then I messaged the guy saying that I was there and to let me know when he gets there. He responds saying that they're actually staying there for the night and that he would be right down. They asked if I could bring it into the lobby, and at that point meeting here made a lot more sense. And while I was a bit iffy on walking across the parking lot into the lobby with an expensive console, I had parked pretty close to the front, so I risked it. I got into the lobby with a box, and the front desk asked if they could help me, and I told them that I was just meeting someone that was staying there. I sat down, and I waited for a few minutes. Then, I saw a guy exit the elevator that looked like he was looking for someone. I correctly assumed that it was the guy. We did the customary greetings and moved forward to the transaction. He opened the box, looked over the items, and remarked that they all looked new. And I told him that I had bought it a while back and that I was the only one that ever played it, and that I was really paranoid about keeping the stuff clean. I mentioned that I had even opened the case and blew out the dust before I listed it, so it was in near perfect condition. I showed him the disc for the games that I had listed, then also mentioned that I was throwing in my copies of Crash and Kingdom Hearts for his little one because I know she'd probably like them. He thanked me and said that he really appreciated it. Honestly, this transaction was going super smooth for our whole conversation, and I thought it was going to be a quick sale. He pulls out his wallet and pulls the cash out, and I see 400 bills. He then mentions to me that he had the full 150, but they had to spend the 50 on pizza for lunch, and that because of that, he was a bit short. And then he says something that I really did not expect, and this is going to be verbatim because I don't want to paraphrase and have this come across as less creepy than it was. He said, and again, "I'm sorry, I'm $50 short, but my girlfriend and my daughter are up in the room, and I'd be willing to let you spend some time with them if you would give me a discount." I want to further emphasize that this guy mentioned his 8-year-old daughter in this context. It wasn't just, "Hey, wanna spend time with my adult girlfriend?" It was girlfriend and daughter. This guy was willing to sell his girlfriend and their child for $50 for personal time. I really don't know what else to say about this all, honestly. The whole thing left me at a loss for words. Pimping out your girlfriend for $50 off a PS4 was gross, sure. But then, including your young daughter in that context was a new level of disturbing. And after a few seconds of just kind of staring at him, and him staring at me, I guess waiting for an answer, I just said, 400 is fine. And I put my hand out. He handed me the cash and said thank you, and I just said yeah, and I turned to leave and put this event behind me. Honestly, I didn't know what to do after this. I don't know if he was being serious or if he had just said that to get a discount because who in the right mind would accept that? Or maybe if it was a weird sting, and if I had said yes, I would have been jumped or arrested. Out of all the possibilities, the worst one, and the one that seriously haunts me, is the one where this was an honest offer. It scares the hell out of me to think that this guy was being serious. And that's the end of it. I told my parents and they didn't seem to really care. I didn't report it to the cops because I didn't know what to tell them. I got the money together and I moved out, and I have been on my own ever since. I really hope that that guy wasn't serious, but if he was, I am so very sorry that I never did anything more, and that, as an ignorant and confused kid myself, I didn't know what to do in this situation. I'm a male, and when I was 25, I had finally gotten to a place in my life where I could start pursuing my passions while supporting myself after I had moved out. Feeling like now was the right time to pick up a hobby, I checked Craigslist for a guitar. I had always wanted to learn how to play, and now that I had the time and money to invest into it, I wanted to get started right away. Of course, I wasn't gonna buy a brand new one. Money wasn't tight, but a good guitar can cost a lot of money. And since it's my first one, it's better to take used instruments first. So, if anything happens due to my newness, I wouldn't have lost hundreds of dollars. Searching Craigslist, I had found one that seemed to be in good condition that wasn't too far from me, and after contacting the seller, I confirmed that it was still available, and according to him, the guitar was only in good condition. And while I didn't know anything about guitars, I did still want to go in person to check it out. After all, It was only a few blocks away and I wouldn't even have to drive. I arranged a meeting with the vendor, Mitchell, to see it tomorrow, and I went about my day. The next day, as I was driving back from work, I stopped by Mitchell's house and I knocked on his door. I was greeted by a pregnant woman with long brown hair wearing a polka dot dress. Hi, is this Mitchell's house? I asked. I'm actually here to look at the guitar that's for sale, I added. The woman nodded and smiled at me before calling to someone from the inside. A man with short hair and a red shirt, whom I assume was Mitchell, came to the door behind her. She informed him that I was here to see the guitar, and then went back inside with a smile. The man then looked at me as he stepped outside. He gestured with a nod towards the garage, which he opened to reveal a rather crowded space. The wife wants to make some room for when the baby gets here, he said. His voice seemed melancholy, with a hint of a southern accent to it. And the money will probably help too. But despite what he said, he seemed depressed as he looked at the piles of stuff in the garage. Everything from rifles to tools to boxes labeled Pokemon was there. And as he took a few steps in to bring out the guitar case, he brought it back to the front of the garage and set it down before opening it. It revealed an orange, woody acoustic guitar. I'm sorry, I'm not really good at describing guitars. She's a beauty, the man said. It's a shame I gotta let her go. He looked at the instrument up and down. A damn shame. I stood there awkwardly while he gazed at it. So, would you take 100 for it? Mitchell looked up at me with conflict in his eyes. 125? I shyly suggested, and with a deep breath, Mitchell shook my hand, still looking at the guitar. With that said and done, I paid him the money and closed the case before walking back to my car. As I was walking back, Mitchell just stood there in the driveway looking at me, even until I got inside my car and drove just a few blocks away. His eyes followed me. The rest of the day was pretty normal. I spent the first few hours goofing around with the guitar, randomly plucking strings, vaguely to the melody of the McDonald's jingle and such, before checking where I can get lessons. After the initial hype of having a guitar die down, I made dinner, watched some TV, and I searched the internet for a few hours before finally falling asleep. Unfortunately, I awoke to a loud crashing sound. I could hear what I can only assume to be shards of glass sliding across the floor as loud thudding footsteps stomped across my home. I immediately got up and I snuck to my door, hoping whoever it was didn't come this way. I locked my bedroom door and then immediately called the police. 911, what's your emergency? And after explaining my situation, they then instructed me to hide in the closet and stay on the line with them. He then assured me that the police would be there soon, and my goal was simply to stay out of sight until the intruder was gone or until the police arrives. After a few minutes, the crashing stopped, but I remained hidden, just like the operator told me, and after a few more, I heard the sirens. Then came a loud banging on my door as a man's voice told me to open the door, saying that it was the police. At that point, I slowly crawled out of my closet and I unlocked the door. They led me out of my home. Then, I saw the porch window shattered, but other than that, there wasn't anything you'd think wrong. After talking to the police and having them take a statement, They asked if I had any place to stay, and after calling my parents and explain what happened, they escorted me there while they investigated the crime scene. After taking inventory of my belongings, no cash or valuables were missing. The only thing that was missing, however, was my guitar. Now, I'm not sure what happened, to be honest, if it was Mitchell or just a random home invader, but because of it, I've been too scared to ever buy anything on Craigslist ever since. I have a fairly short and really weird story about one time when I used Craigslist to find a rental. At the time, I was living with my aunt and uncle, and I was working to find a new place. They weren't really pushy about me getting out of their home, but they were definitely wanting their space back. I appreciated them letting me stay, and I could take a hint, so I decided that I would go and try to find a new place. Enter Craigslist, the world of weird people selling things at a low price. I decided that I would hop onto the internet's version of Kmart and see what was available nearby. On the plus side, I didn't have much to move. I could get it all out and in within a few hours. It was really just a bed, a dresser, and a fish tank. Everything else could fit in a duffel bag. Obviously, with only that going for me, I was looking for a small place to stay, like preferably a studio or something. After searching, talking to a bunch of weirdos, and blocking a few numbers, I found what looked to be a dream come true. A fully furnished, ready-to-move studio apartment that was in a decent part of town. I contacted the owner, and after a quick chat on the phone, we had set up the time for me to move in that following Monday, so long as I could wire him the deposit money by the Friday before. At that time, it was Wednesday, so I had 2 days to get him the money. Thankfully, I had this plan for a little while, so I did have some cash set aside to get this done, and he only wanted $500 for the deposit, which was going to be a bit more than half the rent per month. After discussing it with him and sending him the money via whichever money transfer app we used, he had mentioned that the deposit would cover the first month. It was the middle of the month, so it was good with me, and that on the first month, I would owe my normal $750. I was perfectly fine with this arrangement, and Monday came around, and I showed up with my truck filled with my few items and my clothes. When I got there, he was standing outside the studio, and we chatted about the location as he gave me a quick tour. It was a nice little place, perfect for me, and it had everything that I could have wanted. I actually asked him about the furnishings, why he was renting it out with everything in it, and by everything, I mean everything. There was a TV with a console connected to it, a stereo on the side of the room, and a bookshelf loaded with popular books. He mentioned that he used to rent it as an Airbnb, which is why it was furnished, and that he was just tired of dealing with people like that, so he wanted to rent it out to an actual long-term tenant. It sounded good to me at that time, so I just thanked him and told him that I would have the rent to him on the 1st, and I signed the contract he had typed up, and that was that. Well, that wasn't actually that. In fact, it was not that at all. I lived there for a total of 3 days from Monday to Wednesday, and on Wednesday night, I was sitting on the couch watching TV when I heard someone talking out in the hallway of the apartment. I figured it was just the neighbors, until I heard a key hit the lock and the door opened. I cannot express the awkward moments that followed. The couple that walked into the apartment looked at me like I was a robber. I was looked at them like they were breaking into my apartment. and I think we all just kind of wanted to scream in terror. They asked who I was. I told them that I was the tenant. I asked who they were, and they said they were the tenants. Well, long story short, and after a lot of loud talking and confusion, we figured out what had happened. They were the real tenants, and they had been out of town for the last week. I was not actually the tenant, and was basically sold an occupied unit by someone that didn't have the rights to do so. I showed them my lease, they showed me theirs, much more official looking lease. I showed them the messages and the email and the proof that I paid someone. And, well, they lived there, so they didn't really have to show me anything. What was worse is that they didn't know the guy that I had paid, as the app that I paid with said that his name was something like Mario, and they really had no idea who he was. We ended up getting the police involved so that we could make a report for the whole situation because it was just so messed up. In the end, I apologized for eating their food and using their furniture, and we agreed that I could leave my stuff there for a couple of days so I could move back into my aunt and uncle's house. Mostly just my fish tank and my dresser, as they were heavy and hard to move. Thankfully, they were fairly polite with me, considering that I was basically an intruder in their home. And thankfully, they believed me and didn't just resort to violence or anything like that. Unfortunately, I was never able to get a hold of the landlord, or supposed landlord, to give him a piece of my mind and was out of $500. I did keep in touch with a couple that actually lived there, and they never figured out how the guy got the key to their apartment, and they had the actual owner change the locks immediately. So, that's my weird story about the time that I rented a unit that wasn't for rent. I ended up finding a place that was legit on Craigslist, and then I moved in. And thankfully, there were no more late night surprises. I know this story wasn't terribly creepy per se, but it's still scary to think that this guy had the wherewithal to coordinate this while the couple was out of town, and that he had a key to their place without their knowledge. In the end, it's just one of those weird, creepy life lessons. Sometime after getting my job at Walmart in 2008, I was looking for ways to make some extra money, so I started to list some things on Craigslist to sell. I listed my first generation iPhone for sale, and I received quite a bit of calls about it. One girl offered me a little more than I asked for if I would meet with her that day to sell it to her. Being that I was looking to make extra money, I agreed. We spoke on the phone and then agreed on a time and place to meet. Fast forward a few hours later, at about 7 p.m., we still had daylight. I went to the place she told me that she wanted to meet at, and no one was in the parking lot. We agreed to meet at a public place with lots of people, and I honestly had no idea about the area where I was. I started to feel a little off about this transaction, and it was a few cities over from where I lived. Initially, I refused, but I just kept thinking that I could really use the extra money at that point. I stupidly let her choose a place because talking to her, I got the vibe that she was a good person. I used that term as loosely as it could be, so I trusted her judgment, believing that another woman could not do anything to me. She calls me after I had waited for her for about 25 minutes and tells me that her car broke down a few blocks away, but she was still completely interested in buying my iPhone. I asked her for the directions, and I drove to meet her. By the time I made it to where she told me she was, it had gotten dark. Naturally, I felt weird about meeting her, but again, I was desperate for extra cash at this point. I sat there in my car with the windows rolled up, looking for a broken down car, and there was none in sight. I got scared and said, to hell with this, I'm leaving. And up walks this tall, skinny tan girl and a short and stocky girl. "Hey, are you Hannah?" I said. "Yes, hey BB," she says. "And yes, this is my friend Margot. Can I see the phone?" "Sure," I said. I take the phone and show it to her and tell her that it works great and that I'm only selling it because of an emergency. But all of a sudden, someone hits me in the face and I was disoriented for a moment and confused to what happened. Then I see both of them running away with my phone. I was pissed, to the highest level of positivity, but not because they stole the phone, but because she hit me. To give you a background about me, I am a former kickboxer and I'm a pretty thick girl, but I take no shit, especially if you hit me. So I ran after those bitches and ended up catching the thicker girl, Margot. I grabbed her by her hair and rammed her head into my knee, and then proceeded to beat the hell out of her. The other one comes back as I am on top of Margot, and she's trying to pull me off, but being that I was kickboxing heavily at this time, I was able to keep Margot beneath me by kicking her under her arms and ribs with my knees to keep her down. The other one screams, "Get up, you bitch!" and starts to wail on me with the most weakest punches ever. Blood is literally everywhere. Margot's face was nearly unrecognizable when I was done with her. She had already dropped my phone, but I was highly pissed because she hit me. I get up off of her, and they start to run off, basically with their tails in their ass. I got my phone back along with a headache from the punch. I called the police to report what happened and found out that it was actually a rock she hit me with. A 10-pound rock to be exact. I went to the emergency room to treat my wound, but nothing has become of it to this day. After that, I ended up getting robbed at gunpoint for my iPhone on Craigslist. You would think after the first incident that I would be done with Craigslist, but hell, what can I say? I just hope that it wouldn't be as bad as the first. Well, obviously, I was wrong. I really love Craigslist. I'd estimate that I've met maybe 300 people for buying and selling stuff, and for the most part, everyone was nice and harmless. However, I did run into 2 creeps who made me rethink meeting strangers alone to sell stuff. FYI, I was an early 20s female at that time. The first guy. It was 2009, and I am staying with my parents for the Christmas holidays in a small town in Florida. I'm going through my childhood room and cleaning out the closet, and I find a giant CD holder full of maybe 100 really shitty CDs. Think Nickelback, Aqua, and etc. It's the 21st century. No one uses CDs anymore. And I figure that I'd try to sell the CDs on Craigslist, so I put up a listing. 100 CDs from the late 90s and early to mid 2000s, mix of pop and rock, all for $35 OBO. The next day, I get an email from a guy named John at around 2 p.m. He says that he's in town temporarily and that he wants the CDs. He says that he can pick them up after dinner at around 8 p.m. I email him back my address and also my number, and I tell him to text or call when he's on his way. 8 p.m. comes and goes, and I figure that I've been stood up, which happens often on Craigslist, so no big deal. My dad works for a liquor distribution company and would often do demonstration nights at restaurants and bars and would come home at bar closing time. This night, he gets home at around 3 a.m. I'm in college and a total night owl, so I'm still up probably eating junk food, surfing the web, and watching horror flicks. I hear a car pull up, and I look out the window and see him sitting in his car eating food. He often stops at Taco Bell on his way home and eats it in his car, so my mom doesn't know that he's cheating on his diet. Maybe 10 minutes later, my dad comes in and shouts my name. "There's someone here to see you. Can you please tell me why a strange man is showing up at our house at 3 a.m.? Huh? I go downstairs and my dad says that some guy pulled up in the driveway and asked for me by name. I walk outside with my dad, and this guy, who is maybe mid-30s, gets out of his car and he says that he's the Craigslist guy who wanted to buy my CDs. My dad goes back in the house. I tell the guy it's really late to be stopping by, especially without texting first. However, since I'm awake, I just go and grab the CDs. He then proceeds to drone on and on about why he's buying the CDs. He says that he's engaged to a woman that he loves very much, and all he wants to do is make her happy. He said that last week, someone broke into her car and stole all of her CDs. She was really upset and he wanted to make it up to her. He looked on Craigslist and found my listing and was really excited because I had a bunch of CDs she used to have. A weird thing is, I didn't list any of the artists or bands because I was lazy, but I didn't think about it at that time. Anyway, he said that he was getting it for her as a Christmas surprise. He said he was staying with his future in-laws somewhere nearby and that their family barbecue ran really late, which is why he never made it by 8 p.m. By this point, I've lost interest and say something along the lines of, "That's sweet, but next time you should probably call or text a Craigslister instead of just showing up." And I hand him the CDs, and he hands me cash and I go back inside. 3 days later, I start getting texts from an unknown number. Texts like, "Hey, I don't know my way around this town. Care to tour guide? I could really use a massage. Where can I get a massage in this town? You're Asian. Do you do massage? Would you take $40 for an hour massage? Happy ending?" And I respond finally with, "Who the hell is this?" And he answers, "Oh, sorry. I bought the CDs from you the other day. Do you, squirt?" I didn't respond, obviously. I showed my friends that night and we laughed it off. And then the next day I get more texts. "I still have your address. I'm at the Bank of America near your neighborhood. I just got the $40, babe. Only 3 minutes away. Are you home? You bitch. Stop ignoring me. I'm almost there." I immediately ran downstairs to tell my dad and mom. It was nighttime, so we shut off all of the lights outside and inside my house. My mom, little brother, and I went in my parents' room in the back of the house. My dad hid behind the curtains of the front bay window with a shovel in his hand. And a few minutes later, I heard him run down the front hallway, fling the front door open and run outside. We heard some faint shouting, so we all walked out of the bedroom. And by the time my dad came back in with his shovel, his face red and his hair all disheveled. Apparently, the guy came driving down our street really slow. My dad recognized the car and went running outside with a shovel, yelling obscenities at the guy. And the guy peeled off and never came back or texted me again. The second guy. I was moving from Florida to DC and I was going to load up my car as much as I could with stuff. However, I lived on the 3rd floor plus a bit of a walk from my assigned parking spot. So I figured that I could use some help. I posted an ad on Craigslist Gigs, and I said that I was looking for someone to help me load some heavy items like TV, desk, and etc. in my car. And less than an hour's worth of work, I'd pay $45 or whatever. I give the very first responder my number and address, and he shows up. He was probably 5'8" and 350 pounds of pure fat. The sweat and smell coming off this guy in the Florida heat was pretty nauseating, but I didn't care as long as he did the job right. While he was carting heavy stuff, I was loading lighter things. Whenever I'd go upstairs to grab another load, he'd hurry after me so he could walk back up the stairs behind me. I had the door propped open, so he didn't have to worry about me needing to unlock the door for him or anything. And when he'd follow me up the stairs, he made this weird grunting noises, but I assumed that it was because he was out of shape. Eventually, everything's loaded properly, save for some sweat smears on my stuff. I pay him, and then he drives off. I go back in my place to finish loading and cleaning, and I go out maybe 45 minutes later to put another load in my car. And I see his truck is back, parked across the street from mine. He's sitting in the driver's seat looking at me. When he sees me notice him, he looks away. I walk over to his window and knock. He rolls it down, and I ask if he needs any help or if he was lost. I was really confused as to why he had come back, and I knew he didn't live near me. He didn't say anything, and just rolled his window back up and then drove off. Okay, whatever. Of course, 5 minutes later, my phone starts blowing up. I don't recognize the number, so I don't answer the calls. Then the texts start rolling in. It says, "I bet you taste salty and sweet." I answered, "Who is this?" And he replies, "You're pussy. What are you up to tonight? I can come back over." I get the sinking feeling that it's the Craigslist guy. He had never called me about the job when I gave him my number, so I didn't know what his number was. He sent me another text. "I like your pink panties." Then I realized that he was looking up my dress when I was walking up the stairs, and I immediately felt like a total idiot for wearing a dress that day. He then started dialing my number over and over again. I didn't know how to do the block number thing through Sprint, so I just had to turn my phone off. Later, I was with my guy friend grabbing a bite, and I turned my phone back on. I got another text from the guy about how he wanted to toss me around like a rag doll and tie me up and make me beg for it. I show the text to my friend and tell him the story. The Craigslist creep then proceeds to start blowing up my phone again. So my friend answers and says that he's going to cut his dick off and feed it to his dog if he ever contacts me again. I moved the next day, so I never had to worry about him randomly showing up in his truck again. Since then, I've bought and sold stuff on Craigslist, but I always make people meet me at a public place. I also stalk people's email addresses, their Google Plus accounts, and etc. Hi, I'm Lisa. I'm a 27-year-old female. I've been on this subreddit for a while now, and I decided to share my own story. This happened 5 years ago. I had recently moved into my new apartment, which was farther from my job. But given my lack of driver's license and how dodgy the public transportation is in Detroit, I decided to just get a bike since it wouldn't be too far. So I opened my laptop and I started browsing Craigslist for a used bike to see if I could get any good deals. After finding a few that I was interested in, I decided to give the owners a call. The first one had recently sold his bike and had yet to take down the ad, but the second bike that I was interested in, it was available. I asked about the condition it was in, and the seller offered to let me see it in person before I make any sort of deal. I agreed, and I told him that I would be there tomorrow at around 4 to look at the bike and then make my decision. So the next day at 4, I arrived at his residence. It was a small flat with a silver car parked in the driveway. I walked up to the door and I rang the doorbell. After a few seconds, a man opened the door. He was a tall, thin man with shoulder-length brown hair. He was wearing a white shirt with a stain on it, as well as a pair of jeans. "Hi, I'm here to see the bike. Are you Carl by any chance?" I said. The man smiled and said yes, before exiting his house and then closing the door behind him. As he led me to his garage, he kept looking back at me. He said, "You know, you're pretty cute, Lisa." I didn't really know how to respond to that, so I just tried to change the subject by asking about the bike. He opened the garage to reveal a cluttered space, and from it, he pulled out the bike and rolled it into the yard. "For your viewing pleasure, beautiful." Of course, I was weirded out, but the bike looked really good for the price he was asking, so I just grit my teeth and bared it as I checked the state of the cycle. After inspecting the bike, it seemed to be in a good condition. With my mind made up, I turned to him and asked if he was still okay with the price he posted. But as I turned, I noticed him really close to my face, so I flinched and I backed up a little, but he didn't even react. He stared me dead in the eyes and said, "Well, how about this? You go on a date with me and I'll give it to you for free." I was starting to get a really bad vibe from him, so I fished out the $50 from my purse and I handed it to him, hoping that he would get the message. But he barely acknowledged it, and then he just said, "Does this Saturday sound good to you? I'll pick you up." Well, he clearly wasn't taking the hint, so I took another step back from him and I said in a firm voice, "No, thank you, I'm not interested." And I handed him the money. He stared at me for a moment, and in that silence I felt scared. We were alone in his yard, and he was standing between me and the road, and he was much bigger than me. Thankfully, he let out a sigh and then took the money. With that said and done, I took the bike and I walked it out of his property as fast as I could before getting on and cycling away. And as I did, I vaguely heard him saying, "See you later, Lisa," as I sped off, but I didn't care. All I really cared about was putting as much distance as I could between me and him. Once I had made it to my block, I felt the comforting sense of home. Feeling protected, I pulled in, but that was just wishful thinking. As I parked it at the bike rack for my apartment and I walked up to my room, I realized that my phone had been going off the whole time. And given that I was writing and in a less than ideal mindset, I probably just didn't notice it until now. When I checked my phone, I saw 9 text messages from Carl Euler. My heart dropped. I could feel my heart hammering in my chest as I checked what he texted me, and I realized now my mistake. But at that time, I wasn't thinking about anything other than what kind of weirdo I just bought a bike from. As I opened them, a little check mark appeared below his messages. My eyes grew wide as I came to the realization that he now knew that I looked at them. He sent another text, a simple, "See you Saturday." and I immediately scrolled up to see what he wrote. "Hey, it's Carl, so are we still on for this weekend? I know you're just trying to start things out on the wrong foot and not take advantage of me. You're so thoughtful, but I didn't mind. I know you're a good girl who's gonna treat me right. I'll be sure to treat you for the $50 though. Are you still on your way home? Lisa?" And then the last text after we saw that I checked them. "See you Saturday." I blocked the number and I hoped that that would be the end of it. I spent the next few days trying to forget about it, but his last message, "See you Saturday," was stuck in the back of my mind. That morning, I looked out my door suspiciously. He doesn't know where I live, but the paranoia seemed to be getting the better of me. Seeing nothing, I chastised myself for being so childish, and I went on my way to the store. It was only on my way back that I realized that my fear was right. Right there, on the front of my apartment building was Carl. He was just standing there on his phone. That was until he saw me. A wide smile spread across his face as he looked at me. "Hey, Lisa, I'm here for our date. Did you get my text?" he said as he walked towards me. I unconsciously backed away, shaking my head no and holding my grocery bags tightly. I could feel myself shaking as he approached me, but just as he approached me, I heard another voice from behind me. "Hey, is there a problem here?" I turned my head slightly to the left to see my neighbor Daniel walk up beside me. He looked at me with concern before looking back to Carl. "No problem, just here for my date," he said, looking expectantly at me. No longer alone, I slightly feel safer, and I said aloud, "No, I don't want to go on a date with you. Please, leave me alone." I tried standing a bit taller to sound more stern, but Carl wasn't having that. "Come on, Lisa, don't be like that," he said, trying to get closer. But as he took a step, Daniel moved in front of me, looking him dead in the face. "Well, you heard her, buddy. She's not interested." Daniel was a pretty big guy with a good build, so he was towering over Carl as they locked eyes. And after a few agonizing seconds, Carl nodded before leaving. Me and Daniel both let out a sigh of relief as he turned the corner on the block before he turned and asked if I was okay. I never saw Carl again, and I hope that I never will. Back when I got my first apartment, I was working at a retail store and I didn't make a lot of money, so I tried to get a lot of cheap used stuff to furnish my place, which meant a lot of thrift store shopping and Craigslist scrolling. I found several great buys on there too. I got a practically new couch and chair. I got a kitchen set with pots and skillets and even some window blinds. I had an older TV that my dad let me take from their place since they didn't really use it. However, it had a pretty bad screen burn. It went from rarely being used to being used daily, and it was an older tube TV, so it was bound to happen. So I started browsing Craigslist again to see if I could find a cheap flat screen. Even if it was older or not in the best condition, I thought that it was better than nothing. So after passing up several ads that were asking for too much or it was too far away, I finally found one that was within my range. The title said that it was a 32-inch LG TV and all they wanted for it was $50. They included a few pictures of it as well, and it appeared that there was nothing wrong with it. So I was trying to figure out what the catch was. I messaged them inquiring about it, and their reason made sense. They said that they were moving out of state, so they were more just trying to get rid of a bunch of stuff so they didn't have to take it with them. I thought that this was a total win for me, and I started making plans to pick it up. I was planning to get it the next day because I still needed to get the cash, but they were adamant that I pick it up that day because they were going to be busy. No problem. I just had to run over to the bank and then drive out there, hopefully beating the rush hour. I went, and I pulled out cash from an ATM to make it faster. But that meant that I would be giving them the $60 instead of the $50, since it couldn't do an odd amount. That was fine though, since I was still getting this TV for a steal. I then set up my GPS to the address given, and I made my way there. The place was about 40 minutes away in a city that I had rarely been to, so I was going to be heavily relying on my GPS. When it said that I had arrived, I had to go around by the block as I had apparently driven right by it. And by the third time, I finally slowed down and paid attention to the numbers on the surrounding houses to make sure that I didn't miss it again. Then I realized that I was at the correct place, but it was just easy to miss. Because it was an abandoned house. There was a nice light blue house next to it, and then a smaller rundown home. One of the windows was boarded up, and the front door looked like it was either missing or off on the hinge because I couldn't see one. There was a driveway, but there were no cars in it, nor parked on the side of the road. It may sound stupid, but I was trying to be reasonable in thinking that they did say that they were moving. Maybe they were clearing out or renovating this place, and they were getting rid of stuff left behind here. Or maybe the place was condemned, but squatters were living there. And maybe authorities caught them and told them that they had to leave. I was trying to convince myself any way that I could that this was reasonable, until I saw someone walk over and stand in the doorway. It was a disheveled-looking woman. She had on some old beat-up-looking hoodie with her hair in a bun. She then turned to look back in the house, then looked back and pointed to my car. That's when I saw a guy approach the door. This guy looked a little more intimidating. He was easily twice my size, also in a hoodie, but had it pulled up so I could barely make out a face. The guy started walking down the steps this whole time while he was looking in my direction. Finally, my gut told me that I needed to get the hell out of there, so I just burned out. This didn't stop the guy from running towards my car as I drove away. I kept looking in my rearview mirror the whole way home to ensure that I wasn't being followed by that guy. And when I got back, I went to my computer and I looked at the listing a little further. I zoomed in on the pictures, and the first thing that caught my attention was that it said that the brand for the TV was an LG, yet the logo I saw had a V on it. So this was not even an LG. Then I noticed the window to the left of the TV. It was looking out to a street with a house across from it, and the porch railing had snow on it. This occurred in May, so there was no snow in sight and there were no houses across from the one that I went to. It was an apartment complex and a few small shops. The house also didn't have a porch, let alone a railing. I obviously had some tunnel vision occurring, and I didn't really inspect or notice anything in the pictures beyond the TV that I wanted. I don't know if this was a picture they took elsewhere or just one that they took from the internet, or hell, maybe even another listing on Craigslist. I was disappointed that I didn't get the TV, but even more disappointed in myself for almost falling for what obviously looked like a setup. I reported that listing and then moved on. I did end up finding a TV at a local thrift store a week or two later, and I pushed past the incident until I heard a story on the news. They were talking about safety and precautions that we should take when meeting up with strangers, like from Craigslist and for sale offers in newspaper listings. Then they mentioned how there was another couple that was attacked after responding to an ad on Craigslist. They were meeting up to get something when they were robbed at gunpoint, and one of them stole their car. Their car had their small child in it still. And this event took place in the same city that I went to for the TV. I was terrified, and I thought that it could have easily been the same people that I saw. And if I was stupid enough to get out of the car, it could have been me. I know they weren't too smart taking their own child with them, let alone leaving them in the car, but they were all unharmed as they abandoned the car too. Probably because it came with a small child. And don't worry, this definitely steered me away from this kind of stuff. I still occasionally will get things listed on Nextdoor because at least I know the area, and typically only when I have one of my friends with me to help, just in case. I have a fairly short and really weird story about one time when I used Craigslist to find a rental. At that time, I was living with my aunt and uncle, and I was working to find a new place. They weren't really pushy about me getting out of their home, but they were definitely wanting their space back. I appreciated them letting me stay, and I could take a hint. So I decided that I would go and try and find a new place. Enter Craigslist, the world of weird people selling things at a low price. I decided that I would hop onto the internet's version of Kmart and see what was available nearby. On the plus side, I didn't have much to move. I could get it all out and in within a few hours. It was really just a bed, a dresser, and a fish tank. Everything else could fit in a duffel bag. Obviously, with only that going for me, I was looking for a small place to stay, like preferably a studio or something. And after searching and talking to a bunch of weirdos and blocking a few numbers, I found what looked to be a dream come true. A fully furnished, ready-to-move studio apartment that was in the decent part of town. I contacted the owner, and after a quick chat on the phone, we had set up a time for me to move in that following Monday, so long as I could wire him the deposit money by the Friday before. At that time, it was Wednesday, so I had 2 days to get him the money. Thankfully, I had this plan for a little while now, so I did have some cash set aside to get this done. And he only wanted $500 for the deposit, which was going to be a bit more than half the rent per month. After discussing it with him and sending him the money via whichever money transfer app we used, he had mentioned that the deposit would cover the first month and that on the first month, I would owe my normal $750. It was the middle of the month, so this was good with me. I was perfectly fine with this arrangement, and Monday came around and I showed up with my truck filled with my few items and my clothes. When I got there, he was standing outside the studio and we chatted about the location as he gave me a quick tour. It was a nice little place, perfect for me, and it had everything that I could have wanted. I actually asked him about the furnishings, on why he was renting it out with everything in it. And by everything, I mean everything. There was a TV with a console connected to it, a stereo on the side of the room, and a bookshelf loaded with popular books. He mentioned that he used to rent it as an Airbnb, which is why it was furnished, and that he was just tired of dealing with people like that, so he just wanted to rent it out to an actual long-term tenant. It sounded good to me at that time, so I just thanked him, told him that I would have the rent to him on the 1st. I signed the contract that he had typed up, and that was that. Well, that wasn't actually that. In fact, it was not that at all. I lived there for a total of 3 days, from Monday to Wednesday. And on Wednesday night, I was sitting on the couch watching TV when I heard someone talking out in the hallway of the apartment. I figured that it was just the neighbors, until I heard a key hit the lock and the door opened. I cannot express the awkward moments that followed. The couple that walked into the apartment looked at me like I was a robber, and I was looking at them like they were breaking into my apartment, and I think we all just kind of wanted to scream in terror. They asked who I was. I told them that I was the tenant. I asked who they were, and they said they were the tenants. Well, long story short, and after a lot of loud talking and confusion, we figured out what had happened. They were the real tenants, and they'd been out of town for the last week. I was not actually the tenant, and was basically sold an occupied unit by someone that didn't have the rights to do so. I showed them my lease, they showed me theirs, much more official looking lease, and I showed them the messages and the email and the proof that I paid someone, and, well, they live there, so they didn't really have to show me anything. What was worse is that they didn't know the guy that I had paid, as the app that I paid with said that his name was something like Mario, and they really had no idea who he was. We ended up getting the police involved so that we could make a report for the whole situation because it was so messed up. In the end, I apologized for eating their food and using their furniture, and we agreed that I could leave my stuff there for a couple of days so I could move back into my aunt and uncle's house. Mostly just my fish tank and dresser, as they were heavy and hard to move. Thankfully, they were fairly polite with me considering I was basically an intruder in their home. And thankfully, they believed me and didn't just resort to violence or anything like that. Unfortunately, I was never able to get a hold of the landlord, or supposed landlord, to give him a piece of my mind, and I was out of $500. I did keep in touch with a couple that actually lived there, and they never figured out how the guy got the key to their apartment, and they had the actual owner change the locks immediately. So, yeah, that's my weird story about the time that I rented a unit that wasn't for rent. I ended up finding a place that was legit on Craigslist, and I moved in. And thankfully, there were no more late night surprises. I know the story wasn't terribly creepy per se, but it's still scary to think that this guy had the wherewithal to coordinate this while the couple was out of town, and that he had the key to their place without their knowledge. In the end, it's just one of those weird, creepy life lessons. A while back, when I hit 19, I kind of ended up in a situation where I wanted to get out of the house and get my own place, mostly because I was tired of living with my parents. It was more that I was tired of living by others' rules. I love my parents dearly. I really do, but they were also pretty strict with things, and it was definitely holding back my social life. I'm kind of a free spirit and I like to be out socializing, but they wanted me home by 8 p.m. every night. That's not me complaining, their house, their rules and all. But it was enough to make me realize that I could just move out and get a cheap place nearby, keep them close, and make sure that I had my freedom. So that's what I decided that I was going to do. After looking around for a while, I actually found a decent apartment that I could afford with my job that was less than 10 minutes away from where my parents lived. I went through all the motions to get the apartment. I paid the deposit and I got it. Moving day came and my parents helped me get everything in and set up. And it was at that point that I realized that I didn't have a whole lot and definitely didn't have enough to fill an apartment. My bedroom had my bed, my desk, dresser, and my living room had a table with a TV on it, and that was pretty much it. I started talking to my dad about it and trying to figure out a list of things that I needed for the apartment or what I could use, and my dad made a suggestion that I should look for cheap furniture on Craigslist. We talked about it for a bit, and he actually mentioned that if I found some stuff for the apartment on Craigslist, that would work for me and wasn't terribly expensive. He would go half and half with it and go with me to get it all. I thought that this was a good idea. He had a truck, plus having him with me would make me feel a whole lot safer in dealing with strangers. I agreed, and I told him that I would look online and get a hold of a few people over the next couple of weeks, and then we would meet up when I had everything ready to go. I did just that. I got on Craigslist and I went through a number of postings and sent a few emails. Some responses I got were obviously scams or bots, so I ignored those. But I had a few people that were interested in selling to me at first, but ended up disregarding me after I told them that it was going to be almost 2 weeks before I could pick it up. Apparently, they weren't willing to wait to sell it, which is fine. After sifting and sending, I was actually able to get a few people that were willing to hold on to their items for me, so at least it wasn't all a waste of time. But then, I found a post that was more or less furniture, men's clothing, electronics, and more. I want it all gone for $200. I clicked through the pictures that this person had posted, and looking through it, they were selling a lot of things for such a low price. There were a number of furniture items, a couple of game consoles, and a decent desktop computer. And then clicking through it, I noticed that the clothes were mostly my size. I was over the moon, thinking that I had hit a jackpot. Sure, it seemed a bit sketchy, but at the same time, if this was legit, I would have furnished my whole place and had a bunch of what was basically luxury items for only $200. The post had a phone number on it, so I immediately grabbed my cell and I called the person. I mentioned the post and I asked the woman that had answered why she was selling things for so cheap, because it just did seem a bit odd. She then said that she and her boyfriend had split up and that she hadn't seen him for a few weeks at this point, and all the items she wanted gone were his. She even sent me a few pictures of herself in front of all the items while we were talking to prove that it was all real. I told her that I would give her the asking price for it if she could hold it for 2 days, as it was the Thursday before we were supposed to get the items, and that I would take every single item off of her hands that she wanted to sell. She actually agreed, and she mentioned that I was the first person to call and said that she would go ahead and mark it sold. I was obviously over the moon. I had just struck Craigslist gold. I called my dad and I told him about this lady that had a bunch of items that she wanted to get rid of for only $200. He seemed a bit concerned at first, which was understandable, but I explained the situation and mentioned that she had sent me proof that it was real, and then I told him that it was left over from a bad breakup and that the boyfriend hadn't come back for it. It took a bit of extra convincing, but I was able to finally get him to go with it. Saturday morning comes and I text the woman mentioning that we would be there within the hour. She responded with an okay, and that was it. Not really the best response, but it was enough for me. We headed to the house, and I was feeling even better about this transaction. The house was nice. It was like multi-story and well taken care of, so she could afford to just get rid of these things for way under retail value, kind of nice. We pull into the driveway and I walk up to the door and I ring the doorbell. Nothing. No response. We waited for a little while, but after a couple of minutes with no response, I rang the doorbell again, and still no answer. I pulled up the initial messages between the two of us to make absolutely sure that this was the address, and it definitely was. I then decided to go ahead and give her a call. And when I did, I could hear the phone ringing inside the house, like just on the other side of the door. I actually glanced over toward the window by the door and started looking inside. My dad chastised me at first, saying that I was being rude. But I had this really weird feeling that something was off. This was a nice house. The woman I spoke with was friendly and seemed like she really was wanting to get rid of these items. And I was really wanting to get the stuff she was selling. But then, I realized why I was feeling off about the whole thing and what I was actually seeing. There was someone lying on the floor just inside the door. I mentioned it to my dad, saying that I think something had happened to the lady. He came over and looked in, and then he told me to call 911, and I could tell by his tone that he realized that something was definitely wrong. I called them and I explained the situation to the person on the other end. It was a bit weird having to tell them that we had no idea who this person was, just that we were here to buy stuff, and then tell her that there was a person unconscious on the floor inside the house. It was just as awkward trying to explain it to the first cop that pulled up to the house as well. But I think they understood it better than the dispatcher. And sure enough, the officer agreed that there was a person unconscious in the house and decided that that was cause to kick the door in and then call the medics. They obviously kept us out in the driveway, and we had to answer a lot of questions about why we were here and how we were connected to what was now a crime scene. After the medics show up, the potential crime scene became a confirmed crime scene, and it became pretty clear how serious this really was. The long short of it is, the woman was deceased, and based on how the officer explained it, it was an obvious homicide. Thankfully, I had all the text messages and screenshots of the post to help show that we weren't the ones who killed her. But I also was able to explain to them that she had told me about her ex and how they split up. They ended up taking my information and telling me that they would be in touch with me if they had any more questions. And then we had to leave at that point. They never called me back or asked me to come in at all. I don't know if they ever ended up solving the case, but it definitely seems like this was a situation where the ex-boyfriend came back and then did the unthinkable. What makes it worse, part of me still thinks that he may have done it because she was selling his stuff, and that if I hadn't set up the meeting to pick it all up, he may not have done it at all. But if it weren't for me, then someone else would have jumped on the deal, right? I don't let it tear me up, but it does bother me a little. I did end up getting a couch for my living room from another seller and a few other things, but that was the only time that I ever used Craigslist. I know it's not a common thing to happen, but I didn't want to ever be put in a situation like that again. A long time ago, I was a single mother with a young boy about 7 years old, and I was doing my best to make ends meet with what little money that I could scrape together, working part-time. We didn't live in the best home, but I did everything that I could to keep him happy, healthy, and fed. And I like to believe that I did a damn good job of it. I can say that nowadays, things are much better. He's grown, and I'm in a new marriage. And honestly, life is much happier. And that said, there were times where I made mistakes and where things got really rough. This is actually about an event where the unthinkable could have happened, and I really shouldn't have brought him with me, but I'm actually glad that I had. Though, I will say that my decisions weren't the worst part. I thought things were okay. I just trusted someone a bit more than I should have. So this was back when my son and I had just moved into a new apartment when he was about 7 or 8 at the most. My husband and I had been divorced for a year, and I was just really getting out into the world after losing the house. Well, there's a long story there, but I won't get into it. I was working part-time, so I didn't have a lot of money. But I had a family member that was helping me with the rent for the time being, so it wasn't a huge deal. However, after having lived with them for a year, and then moving into my own apartment, I realized how much I was actually missing to be self-sufficient. One of the big things that I was missing was a vacuum. Vacuums are the one thing that you never even think about, and when you realize you don't have one, and then go look for a good one, you come to the conclusion that they are rather expensive. So, in a moment of genius, I went out to Craigslist to see if I could find a cheap secondhand vacuum that was at least decent quality. In my mind, if I could find one that I could use and keep for a year at most, I would most likely be able to get the money together to get a good one that was new. And as such, I went for a mid-low price tier when searching, and I ended up finding one that I liked, and the person only wanted $20 for the vacuum. I contacted him, everything seemed reasonable, and honestly, I didn't even get any red flags when myself and this person sent messages back and forth about the whole transaction. Everything about this transaction seems like it was going to be ideal, like I would bring $20 and then he would give me a vacuum, and then that would be it. Of course, one of the dumb decisions that I did make was being willing to meet this guy at his house instead of a public place. I will admit that I was a bit naive back then, and I hadn't done many transactions online. I thought that it would just be a 5-minute thing. So on that following Sunday, I started heading toward the address that he gave me, and I sent a message saying that I was on my way. I pulled up to the house, and there was a man standing outside on the front porch holding a glass of iced tea, just kind of watching me as I pulled up. I got out of the car, and my son followed pretty closely behind me. I thought about telling him to stay in the car, but I kind of thought that that would be a worse idea in a strange place. As I approached, the man on the porch asked if I was my name, and I said that I was. He turned and then opened the door, and then mentioned that I could step in the entryway and that he would go get the vacuum for me. We stepped just inside the door, and then the man went over toward the other end of the house and into a bedroom. As he was out of my sight, He kind of started making small talk about the vacuum, saying that it was still good, that he had just changed the belt on it, and he apologized that he had lost one of the attachments for it. After this, he, out of seemingly nowhere, asked if I was a Christian. I mentioned that I was, and because I was taken aback, I asked why that was relevant. He then followed it up with I was just asking. Oh, I'm sorry if I pulled you away from church to do this sale. He came out of the room with a vacuum, and he then continued saying, I'm pretty devoted to my faith myself, so I know how important it is to go to church. Do you go to church? It was a bit weird, but I thought that maybe this man was just really religious. So I mentioned that we hadn't lately because we had just moved and I hadn't found one in the area to attend. He smiled and nodded, like he understood. But then it got weirder, he said, and this is a direct quote because I will never forget his words. He said, You know, God told me that you would be coming alone, and that if you did, I should take you as mine and then run away into the desert. I just sort of stared at him like, what the hell is wrong with you? He then laughed and then said, But you didn't come alone. You came with your son. I think he was testing me, and this was his way of making sure that I'm faithful. I was ready to run out of that house, but I was also afraid that if I did, he would do something. After what probably was 2 or 3 minutes of panic-filled silence, he just kind of pushes the vacuum towards me and says, Oh, here, you can have it. I don't need the money. I grabbed it and just sort of turned away to leave. The entire time that we were walking toward my car, this man was seriously saying some prayer, one that I didn't know, so I don't think if it was a real one. I pulled away and I drove out of that neighborhood faster than I should have. Thankfully, my son just kind of thought that he was weird, and it didn't really click that we were in the presence of an absolute psychopath. I just kind of laughed and I said to him, Yeah, he was a bit weird, huh? And then thanked my lucky star that he decided that my son was a reason to not hurt me. That was one of the only times that I ever did any deals off of Craigslist, and was the only time that I ever did one at someone's house. After that, it was always store parking lots or other public places. I will also mention that I blocked his number after that, as he did try to text me one more time asking if I wanted to go to his church. I responded with no thanks, and then I blocked him. Thankfully, the vacuum did work, so I guess that's a plus. I'm a college student living in Denver, Colorado. Between tuition and my textbooks, I couldn't afford my small apartment on my own anymore. My part-time job at the campus bookstore barely covered groceries, and I was constantly stressed about making rent. So finally, I decided that it was time to look for a roommate to help share with the expenses. After posting an ad on Craigslist, I received a few responses, but one guy stood out. A guy named Mike seemed perfect. He was around my age, worked as an ID specialist, and he had good references. Plus, he was willing to move in immediately, which was a big plus for me. Mike and I met at a coffee shop near my apartment, and he seemed like a decent guy. Tall, athletic build, short brown hair, and an easygoing demeanor. We talked for a while and everything checked out. He showed me his references, which included a guy named Steve who vouched for him over the phone. I figured that I had finally found my new roommate. Mike moved in the following weekend. At first, everything was great. He paid his half of the rent on time, he kept the common areas clean, and we even hung out a few times. We grabbed some beers, watched some movies, typical roommate stuff. But then, things started to get weird. It began with small things, like I would hear footsteps in the middle of the night, even though I knew that Mike was in his room. Doors would be slightly ajar when I was sure that I had closed them. I just chalked it up to my imagination or just me being forgetful, or maybe the old building settling. But then it got worse. One night, I was lying in bed trying to fall asleep when I heard faint whispers coming from the hallway. I got up, thinking Mike might be on a late night phone call. But when I opened my door, the hallway was empty. I peeked into Mike's room and he was sound asleep, snoring softly. I just shook it off as a dream or maybe the wind playing tricks on me. A few days later, I came home from class to find Mike in the living room, rummaging through my backpack. Startled, I asked him what he was doing. "Oh, sorry man, I thought it was mine. I was just looking for my charger," he said with an awkward laugh. I found it odd, but I just let it go. However, I started to notice other things going missing. Small items like my keys, my wallet, even my favorite hoodie. They would always turn up in strange places in the house, like the back of the closet or under the couch cushions. I confronted Mike about it, but he always had a reasonable explanation or claimed that he didn't know anything about it. One night, I stayed up late studying for an exam, and around 2 a.m., I heard a noise coming from the attic. Our building had a small attic space accessible through a hatch in the hallway ceiling, but I have never been up there before. Curious and a bit on edge, I grabbed the flashlight and quietly made my way to the hatch. As I climbed the ladder and I pushed the hatch open, I was hit by a musty smell and a wave of cold air. Shining my flashlight around, I saw boxes of old junk, some cobwebs and dust, nothing too unusual. But then, in the corner, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There was a makeshift bed, a collection of empty food wrappers, and a notebook. I climbed into the attic and I approached the corner, my heart pounding in my chest. Flipping through the notebook, I found pages filled with notes about me, my daily schedule, conversations that I had with Mike, even details about my family and friends. There were sketches of my face, detailed drawings of my apartment, and bizarre symbols that I didn't recognize. Panicking, I took the notebook and I climbed back down, closing the hatch as quietly as I could. I went back to my room and I locked the door, trying to make sense of what I just found. I didn't sleep all that night, and the next morning, I decided to confront Mike. When he came out of his room, I was waiting for him in the living room, and the notebook was on the coffee table. "Mike, what the hell is this?" I demanded, pointing to the notebook. His face went pale, and for a moment, he looked genuinely scared, but then his expression changed to one of cold determination. "It's not what you think, man. I can explain," he said, but I wasn't interested in his explanations. I want you out of here, today, okay? I don't care what you have to say," I replied, my voice trembling with anger and fear. Mike didn't argue with that. He packed his things and then left within the hour. But before he did, he said something that chilled me to the bone. "You shouldn't have gone up there, Daniel. You've made a mistake," he said, his eyes narrowing. "Just remember, you brought this on yourself." After he left, I changed the locks and I tried to move on with my life. But the strange occurrences didn't stop. I started receiving anonymous emails and text messages alluding to things only Mike could know. I even found a note slipped under my door one morning. It said, "I'm still watching." I went to the police, but without concrete evidence, there wasn't much that they could do. They advised me to stay vigilant and report any further incidents. I also contacted Steve, the reference who'd vouch for Mike, only to find out that Steve had never heard of him and that the phone call had been a setup. I decided to move out of the apartment and then find a new place, hoping to leave that nightmare behind me. I changed my phone number, I deleted all my social media apps, and I tried to start fresh. For a while, things seemed to get better. But then today, I received a package at my new address. Inside was the notebook that I had found in the attic, along with a note that simply said, "You can't run from me." I'm going to the police tomorrow and I'll post updates then. So, to Mike, screw you. I never thought that I would have a reason to share something on here, but after what happened last weekend, I felt it was important to warn others. This is a long one, so bear with me. My husband and I have a little girl named Emma who just turned 5. We adore her, but she's growing up fast, and we have accumulated so many baby clothes and also baby items over the years. We have no plans for any more children with this economy and also with my health problems, so we decided that it was time to clear out the clutter. We had boxes upon boxes, taking up valuable space in our basement, and we were struggling with a leaky pipe down there that demanded immediate attention. A plumber's visit was urgently needed in our house, but the cost was higher than we anticipated. My husband suggested selling some of Emma's old clothes and baby items to help cover the expense. It seemed like a practical solution, and I thought Craigslist would be the quickest way to reach potential buyers. So, I took pictures of the baby clothes, the crib, and the various toys, and then I posted an ad on Craigslist. Within a couple of hours, I received a few inquiries, but one message stood out. A man who introduced himself as Mark. He expressed interest in buying everything for his pregnant wife. He seemed genuinely excited and then mentioned that they were expecting their first child and that they were on a tight budget. This really tugged at my heartstrings, and I was eager to help them. We arranged to meet in a busy shopping center parking lot the next evening. For safety reasons, I always prefer public areas for transactions, and my husband agreed to come with me. However, he got stuck at work and was running late. I didn't want to inconvenience Mark, so I decided to go ahead and meet him alone with my husband on his way. When I arrived, Mark was already there waiting by his car. He seemed friendly enough, and he thanked me repeatedly for the items. We started chatting, and he asked about my daughter, and I shared some stories about Emma. Everything seemed normal. Well, until it wasn't. Out of nowhere, Mark's demeanor shifted. He started making comments about how attractive and youthful I looked for a mother. I was taken aback, but I tried to steer the conversation back to the baby items. He wasn't having it. He leaned in closer and asked if I wanted to grab a drink with him sometime.
I was stunned. I said, "Excuse me? I'm married and so are you. I'm just here to sell some baby clothes." He ignored my protest, and he even moved closer, his hand brushing against mine, and then he reached for my wrist. He said, "Come on, just one drink. What's the harm, right?" My heart was racing. I tried to pull my wrist away, but his grip tightened. I said, "Let go of me," I demanded, louder this time. But he didn't. Instead, he started to drag me towards his car. Panic set in. The parking lot was unusually quiet, and there were no other people in sight. I struggled against his grip, my mind racing with fear. But just then, I saw my husband's car pull into the lot. Relief washed over me and I shouted for his name. My husband jumped out of the car and then sprinted towards us. Without a moment's hesitation, he punched the guy square in the face, causing him to stumble back and then release his grip on me. He didn't stick around. He scrambled to his feet and then ran back to his car, speeding off before we could even get his license plate. Shaken, I clung to my husband, trying to process what had just happened. We drove home in silence, the gravity of what had just happened weighing heavily on the both of us. My husband kept his hand on my knee, squeezing it gently every now and then, as if to reassure himself that I was okay. I appreciated his presence more than ever. When we got home, I just put Emma to bed, my hand still trembling slightly. I didn't want her to sense any of my fear, so I told her an extra long bedtime story, and I sang her favorite lullaby until she finally drifted off to sleep. And only then did I allow myself to break down. My husband held me as I sobbed, the fear and adrenaline finally catching up to me. He rubbed my back and whispered soothing words, telling me that everything was going to be all right. Eventually, my tears subsided and we talked about what had happened. "I am so sorry that I was late. I should have been there with you." His voice was thick with guilt. It's not your fault. We couldn't have known that guy was a creep. I just wish I had listened to my gut and I waited for you," I reassured him. The days that followed were a blur. We filed the police report, but without any concrete information about that buyer, there wasn't much that they could do. This incident has left me shaken, but I was determined not to let fear rule my life. We decided to take a break from selling anything online for a while. Instead, I just donated the remaining baby items to a local women's shelter. It felt good to know that they were going to families in need. But this experience had truly left me wary of strangers. Life though returned to normal, but I couldn't shake the sense of unease whenever I thought about that night. It just kept replaying in my mind, wondering how things might have gone differently. What if my husband didn't arrive when he did? That thought was too terrifying to dwell on. A few weeks later, I received a call from the police. The incident really changed me. I became more vigilant, more protective of my family. I started taking self-defense classes and encouraged my friends to do the same. It was empowering to know that I could defend myself if needed. But the fear lingered in the back of my mind. One evening, I was sitting on the porch, watching Emma play in the yard. My husband came out and then handed me a cup of tea. "You okay?" he asked, sitting down beside me. I nodded, taking a sip of the warm tea, and I answered, I'm getting there. Some days are better than the others, though." He wrapped his arm around me, pulling me close and said, "We'll get through this together. And we did, slowly but surely. So, creepy baby clothes buyer, let's not meet ever again. I'm a 32-year-old guy living in a small town outside of Chicago. I recently bought an old house that needed a lot of work, but I saw the potential and I decided to go for it. Everything was going relatively smooth until I had a major plumbing issue. It was very late on a Sunday night and I was getting ready for bed when I noticed water pooling on the bathroom floor. I quickly realized that a pipe under the sink had burst and water was gushing out uncontrollably. I panicked. I didn't have the skills or tools to fix something like that, and I couldn't just let the water keep flowing. My first thought was to turn off the main water supply, but I had no idea where it was located in the old house. Desperate, I decided to find an emergency plumber who could come out immediately and help me. I grabbed my phone and I started searching online. Most of the emergency plumbers that I called didn't answer or said that they couldn't come until the morning. So that's when I turned to Craigslist. I found a listing for a 24/7 emergency plumber and then I called the number. A man named Joe answered and said that he could be at my place in 30 minutes. I was relieved and I gave him my address. And true to his word, Joe arrived around midnight. He was truly a burly man in his late 40s with a scruffy beard and a toolbox in hand. He seemed a bit rough around the edges, but I figured that anyone willing to come out at this hour couldn't be too bad. "Hey, thank you so much for coming, man," I said as I led him to the bathroom. "The pipe under the sink burst and I can't stop the water." "Oh, no problem. Let me take a look," Joe answered. He dropped to his knees and then started fiddling with the pipes. After a few minutes, he managed to stop the water and then began making repairs. I watched him work for a bit, but then he turned to me and said, "Listen, I've got this under control, but it's gonna take a while. You might as well go relax, and then I'll let you know when I'm done." I hesitated, but then I figured that he probably knew what he was doing, so I told him, "All right, I'll be in the living room if you need anything." I left him to his work and then sat down on the couch trying to stay awake. About an hour later, Joe called out to me, "Hey, can you come here for a sec?" I got up and then went to the bathroom where Joe was standing with a slight frown on his face. "I've got it mostly fixed, but there's a part that I need to replace. I don't have it with me, but I can come back tomorrow to finish up things." I sighed, exhausted but grateful. "Oh, okay, that works. How much do I owe you for tonight?" Joe hesitated and answered, "Tell you what, I'll just charge you for the full job once I'm done tomorrow. Sound good?" "Sure," I replied, too tired to argue. "Thanks again, Joe. See you tomorrow." He nodded and then packed up his tools, promising to return the next day. I watched him leave, feeling a bit uneasy but too exhausted to dwell on it. I locked up and then I went to bed, hoping the worst was over. The next morning, I woke up feeling somewhat refreshed and decided to check on the bathroom. The floor was still damp, but at least the water had stopped. I spent the day cleaning up the mess and waiting for Joe to return. He showed up in the early afternoon, looking a bit more put together than the night before. I led him back into the bathroom and watched as he completed the repairs. This time, he worked quickly and efficiently, and within an hour the job was done. "Well, You're all set, Joe said, standing up and wiping his hands on the rag. That should hold for a while. Just keep an eye on it, okay? And if you have any more issues, give me a call. Thanks, Joe. I really appreciate it, I replied. I was relieved to have the problem fixed. I then paid him for his work, and he left without incident. For the next few days, everything seemed fine. The pipe held up, the bathroom was back to normal. But for some reason, I started feeling uneasy. It just felt wrong. It felt like someone or something was always looking at me, always observing me and the things that I do in my house. But I just can't seem to figure out why I was feeling this way. I thought it was just stress, especially after the plumbing issue that I have had recently. But one night, I decided to investigate once and for all. I began checking every nook and cranny of the house. As I moved through the rooms, I made sure to be silent so I can catch anything that's out of place. Then, I heard it. A little buzzing sound. It was so quick, and the volume was not much at all. If I had been a little bit more noisier, then I wouldn't hear it at all. I heard it inside the bathroom. It was around a corner that I didn't particularly care about. I checked it, and my heart nearly stopped when I found a tiny camera. Panic set in as I realized what was happening. I frantically searched the rest of the house, finding more hidden cameras and listening devices in various rooms. Someone had been watching and listening to me. My mind raced back to Joe, the emergency plumber that I had called before. He had insisted on working alone that night, giving him ample opportunity to plant the devices. I immediately called the police and I explained the situation. They arrived quickly and conducted a thorough research, confirming my suspicions. I truly believe that Joe had indeed planted the cameras and bugs all throughout my house. I mean, who else could it be? The officers took the devices as evidence and assured me that they would investigate further. They also advised me to stay somewhere else for the time being, as it wasn't safe to remain in the house. I packed a bag, stayed with a friend, feeling a mix of fear and anger. A few days later, the police contacted me with an update. It was definitely Joe. They told me that Joe was a known criminal with a history for breaking and entering, as well as installing surveillance equipment in people's homes. He had been on the run for years, using his plumbing job as a front to gain access to houses. They managed to track him down and finally arrest him. But the whole experience left me shaken. I can't believe how easily I had let a stranger into my home and how much trust I had placed on him. The thought of someone watching my every move, listening to my conversations, and invading my privacy was horrifying. The lesson I got from this is to always make sure to thoroughly vet anyone that you hire for work. To the creepy plumber who violated my home and my privacy, Joe, let's never meet again. Hi everyone, I'm a 29-year-old guy living in Seattle. I'm working as a graphic designer and I'm a longtime lurker here. I've read countless stories on this sub and I never thought that I'd have one of my own to share. But after what happened, I need to get this off my chest. Like many people, I've been struggling to make ends meet and I needed some extra income to cover my bills and maybe stash away a bit of savings. That's when I turned to Craigslist, hoping to find a part-time job that wouldn't interfere with my regular work hours. I spent a few evenings scrolling through listings, mostly coming across spammy ads or jobs that required way more time than I could afford. But just as I was about to give up, I found a listing that seemed perfect. It said, part-time cleaner needed for a large house, flexible hours, male only. The male only part for a cleaner ad was a bit odd to me, but I just assumed that maybe heavy lifting was required, so that's why they needed a man. The pay was decent and the ad mentioned that no previous experience was necessary. I figured, why not give it a shot? I reached out to the poster, a woman named Margaret, who quickly responded and seemed eager to hire someone. We arranged to meet at her house the following day for an interview and also a tour of the house. She said that it would only take an hour or so and I could start immediately if everything went well. The day came and I drove out to Margaret's house. It was located in a quiet upscale neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. The house itself was massive. It was a 3-story Victorian with intricate woodwork and a huge, well-maintained lawn. It was the kind of place you would expect to see in a movie, not on a Craigslist ad, you know. I parked my car. I walked up to the stone path to the front door, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. I rang the doorbell, and a few moments later, the door swung open to reveal Margaret. She looked to be in her mid-50s with graying hair, but it was pulled back into a neat bun and a sharp, almost piercing blue eyes. She was dressed in a tasteful, if somewhat old-fashioned dress and had an air of authority about her. "Hello, you must be Daniel," she said with a warm smile. "I'm Margaret, please come in." "Thanks, nice to meet you," I replied, stepping inside. The inside of the house was just as impressive as the outside. Antique furniture, elegant chandeliers, and intricate rugs that looked like they cost more than my car. It was clear that Margaret had money. I felt so out of place being surrounded by these. She then led me through the house, pointing out the areas that would need cleaning and explaining the task that she had in mind. It seemed straightforward enough: vacuuming, dusting, mopping, and the occasional deep cleaning of the bathrooms and kitchen. As we walked, Margaret shared a bit about herself. She was a widow, having lost her husband a few years back, and had no children. She admitted that maintaining such a large house on her own was becoming too much for her, hence the need for help. Despite her outwardly friendly demeanor, there was something about Margaret that made me uneasy. She stared to me too intently. She was also a bit touchy. She would occasionally place a hand on my arm, lingering longer than felt appropriate. But the pay was good, and I really needed the money, so I just brushed off my concerns. After the tour, Margaret led me to the basement, which she said would need the most attention. The basement was large and cluttered with old furniture. There were some boxes and various knickknacks in it. And as soon as we reached the bottom of the stairs, she turned to me. "I hope you don't mind, but I'd like to give you a little test, just to make sure that you're thorough," she said, with a little disturbing smile in her face. "Sure, no problem," I replied, trying to sound enthusiastic. "Great, I'll just wait upstairs. Take your time, and when you're done, come find me." She headed back up the stairs, leaving me alone in the dimly lit basement. I set to work, dusting and organizing as best as I could, and after about half an hour, I decided that I had done a decent enough job and I headed back to the stairs. But when I reached the top, the door was closed. I tried the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Panic started to set in as I pounded on the door. "Margaret, the door's stuck," I shouted, hoping that she could hear me. Her voice came from the other side, calm and almost playful. "Oh, I know. It's not stuck, Daniel. It's locked." "What? Why? Let me out of here!" I demanded, my heart racing. There was a pause before she responded. "I will, on one condition." "What condition?" I asked, dreading the answer. "I want you to agree to have sex with me." Her words hit me like a ton of bricks, and I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Are you insane? Let me out of here!" "Not until you agree," she replied, her tone cold and unyielding. I was trapped, and I knew I had to think fast. Of course, I knew I was bigger and stronger than her, but what if she had a weapon or something? I had no idea what she was capable of, and the last thing that I wanted was to be stuck in that basement any longer. "Okay, I agree, but just this one time, okay?" I said, trying to sound convincing. "So just open the door so we can be done with it." There was a silence for a moment, and then I heard the sound of the lock clicking. I braced myself, ready to bolt the moment the door opened. And as soon as the door cracked open, I shoved it with all of my might, catching Margaret off guard. She stumbled back and I took off, sprinting through the house and out the front door. I didn't stop running until I reached my car, and then I peeled out of the driveway, my heart pounding in my chest. I drove around aimlessly for what felt like hours, trying to process what had just happened to me. I felt shame. I felt embarrassed. And I couldn't bring myself to call the police. What would I even say? That a woman threatened to keep me in her basement if I didn't have sex with her, and that I agreed to have sex with her just to escape? It felt so humiliating. Maybe I was just anxious or confused or maybe in shock. I don't know. I did not know what to do. In the end, I decided to just let it go. I blocked Margaret's number and I deleted all of our correspondence. I never went back to that neighborhood, and I haven't used Craigslist for anything since. So, Margaret, you deranged woman who tried to trap me in your basement, let's never meet again. Hey everyone, I have been a lurker here for years, but after what happened to me last week, I feel compelled to share my story in the hopes that it stops someone else from making the same mistake. This is my first post on here, so please bear with me if it's a bit rough around the edges. I'm a 34-year-old guy living in Portland, Oregon. I work a regular 9-to-5 job as a software developer, and like most people, I have my hobbies to keep me sane. One of those hobbies is kayaking. Growing up, my family spent summers at a cabin by a lake. I have nothing but fond memories of paddling out and exploring the water. It's a peaceful escape from my daily grind, and I've been meaning to get back into it. However, living in the city and dealing with my student loans, my rent, and just life in general, I couldn't justify dropping a ton of money on a brand new kayak. That's when I thought of Craigslist. I've used it before for smaller purchases, for furniture, some gadgets, that sort of thing. So I figured, why not see if anyone's selling a kayak for a decent price, right? I started browsing the listings, and as luck would have it, I found one almost immediately. It was listed for $200, which is a steal considering that it was described as barely used and in great condition. The seller's name was Rick, and he lived a couple of hours away in a rural area just outside of Eugene. I texted him, and he responded almost immediately, saying that the kayak was still available and that he would be happy to meet that weekend. We agreed on Saturday morning, and I was excited at the prospect of finally getting back on the water, and I figured a little road trip wouldn't be the worst way to spend a Saturday. When Saturday came around, I packed up my car and set out early. The drive was pretty uneventful for the most part, with the city gradually giving way to the rolling fields and the dense forest of rural Oregon. About 2 hours in, I turned onto a narrow winding road that led deeper into the woods. The GPS indicated that I was getting close, but the further I went, the more uneasy I felt. My cell service was spotty at best, and the few houses that I passed looked old and abandoned. Finally, I arrived at the address Rick had given me. It was an old, weather-beaten farmhouse at the end of a long dirt driveway. There was a large barn off to one side, and everything about the place just screamed creepy. But I have driven all this way, and I did not want to turn back empty-handed. I pulled up to the house and Rick came out to greet me. He looked to be in his late 50s with graying hair and a lean, almost wiry frame. He was friendly enough, but there was something off about him that I couldn't quite put my finger on. Maybe it was the way his eyes seemed to linger a bit too long, or the way his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Hey there, you must be Joe," he said, extending a hand. "I'm Rick. Glad you could make it." "Yeah, thanks for meeting me," I replied, shaking his hand. "So, where's the kayak?" Rick gestured toward the barn. "It's in there. Come on, I'll show you." As we walked toward the barn, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The whole place had an air of neglect, like it hadn't seen a proper maintenance in years. The bar door creaked loudly as Rick pulled it open, revealing a dimly lit interior filled with old farming equipment and various odds and ends. And there it was, the kayak. It looked just like the pictures, maybe even better. It was a sleek, bright red model that seemed out of place among the dusty, decaying surroundings. "There she is," Rick said, patting the kayak. "I told you, it was in great condition." I walked over and ran my hand along the hull. It did look great, but my unease hadn't subsided. Still, I'd come this far, and it was a good deal. "Well, it looks good," I said, trying to sound enthusiastic. "So, let's load it up?" "Sure thing," Rick replied. "But first, would you mind giving me a hand with something in the back? I got an old generator that needs moving, and my back's been acting up, you know." Every instinct told me to get out of there, but politeness and the prospect of a cheap kayak overrode my better judgment. I answered him. Sure. Go ahead, lead the way." Rick led me through the barn and out the back door. There was a small clearing behind the barn, bordered by the thick woods. In the middle of the clearing was a large rusted generator. It didn't look like it still worked, though. As we approached it, Rick stopped and turned to me. "You've ever seen anything like this?" he asked, his tone oddly conversational. No, can't say I have," I replied, glancing around nervously. Rick's demeanor changed in an instant. His friendly facade dropped, replaced by a cold, calculating expression. He said, "You know, Joe, there's something you should know about this place." and before I could react, he pulled out a knife and then slashed at my arm. I stumbled back, clutching the wound, adrenaline flooding my system. "What the hell, man?" I shouted, trying to put distance between us. Rick advanced slowly, knife glinting in the sunlight. "You're not the first one to come here looking for a deal, and you won't be the last." Panic surged as I realized the gravity of my situation. I turned and I bolted towards the woods, branches whipping at my face as I ran so fast. I could hear Rick behind me, moving swiftly despite his age. I don't know how long I ran, but eventually, I burst out onto a road. A car was approaching and I ran into the middle of the street, waving my arms frantically. The driver, a middle-aged woman, slammed on her brakes and then jumped out. "What happened to you?" she exclaimed, taking in my disheveled appearance and the blood on my arm. Please, you have to help me. There's a guy back there and he's trying to kill me," I gasped, barely able to catch my breath. She didn't hesitate. She ushered me into her car and then sped off, dialing 911 as she drove. I looked back, half expecting to see Rick emerging from the woods, but there was no sign of him. The police arrived quickly, and after giving my statement, they searched the area and they found the farmhouse and the barn, but Rick was nowhere to be found. Inside the barn, they had discovered a hidden room with various items. There were wallets, IDs, even car keys. And it became clear that Rick had been luring people there for who knows how long. I'm still shaken by this experience, and I can't help but think about what might have happened if I hadn't managed to escape. I've deleted Craigslist from my phone and I don't think I'll ever use it again. So, to Rick, the psychopath with a kayak, let's never meet again. Hi everyone. I'm a 27-year-old guy living in Chicago, and I use Craigslist. For those who don't know what it is, Craigslist is a popular online platform where people can buy and sell items. You can also find jobs, housing, and also offer services. It's like an online classified section of a newspaper, but with a much broader reach. You can find some great deals there too. But as I recently learned, you can also find yourself in some pretty terrifying situations. This happened to me about 6 months ago, and I'm still shaken up by it. I recently moved into a new apartment after finally saving up enough to leave my old rundown place. The new apartment was a huge improvement. It was spacious, had better lighting, and in a nicer neighborhood. The only problem was that I hardly had any furniture. My budget was tight and buying new furniture was out of the question. And that's when I turned to Craigslist. I spent a few evenings browsing the free section, hoping to find some decent items that people were giving away. And that's when I stumbled upon a listing for a free couch. The picture showed a slightly worn but still very nice leather couch. It was a deep brown color and looked comfortable, definitely better than the old futon that I've been using. The ad mentioned that the owner was moving out of state and they needed to get rid of it quickly. And that sounded perfect to me. I contacted the owner, a man named Tom, and he responded almost immediately. He said the couch was still available and then gave me his address, which was about a 20-minute drive from my apartment. We arranged for me to come by the next day to pick it up. And the following evening, I borrowed a friend's truck and then drove to Tom's place. It was in a quiet suburban neighborhood, and the house looked well kept. I felt a bit nervous as I parked the truck and I walked up to the front door. But I reminded myself that This was just a simple furniture pickup. Tom answered the door after the first knock. He was in his late 40s with graying hair and a friendly smile. He invited me in and then led me into the living room where the couch was waiting. It looked just as good in person as it did in the pictures. "Here it is," Tom said, patting the back of the couch. "I'm glad someone can use it. It's just too good to throw away, you know." "Ah, thanks, I really appreciate it," I replied. "I just moved into a new place, so this will absolutely be perfect." Tom helped me carry the couch out to the truck, and we had some friendly small talk along the way. He told me that he was moving to Florida for a new job and didn't want to deal with moving all of his furniture. He seemed like a really nice guy, and everything felt normal. After we loaded the couch into the truck, I thanked him again and then drove back to my apartment. I managed to get the couch inside with the help of a neighbor, and then we set it up in my living room. I was exhausted from all the lifting, but I was also thrilled to have a proper piece of furniture. That night, I settled onto the couch to watch some TV. It was incredibly comfortable, and I felt like I really had lucked out. But as the night went on, I started to notice something strange. My dog, Max, who usually loved lounging on the couch, refused to go near it. He just sat there, staring at it and growling softly at times. I chalked it up to him being unsettled by the new smell, and then decided to give him some time to adjust. Over the next few days, Max's behavior around the couch didn't improve. In fact, it got worse. He would bark at it, refuse to come into the living room, and even started having accidents in the other rooms. It was completely out of character for him, and I began to feel uneasy myself. So one night, I finally decided to investigate. I took a flashlight and I closely examined the couch. At first, I didn't see anything unusual, but then I noticed a small tear in the fabric on the underside. I pulled at the tear, widening it enough to see inside. And my heart nearly stopped when I saw what was hidden there. Skeletal remains, cleaned and carefully wrapped in cloth, and next to the bones was an old leather-bound diary. This discovery made my skin crawl. The bones didn't emit any foul smell, likely because they had been meticulously cleaned. Well, I immediately called the police to report the gruesome find. The officers arrived quickly and cordoned off my apartment. They took the remains and the diary for forensic analysis, and the lead detective assured me that they would conduct a thorough investigation and that I had done the right thing by reporting it. A few days later, one of the officers called to update me. They had confirmed that the remains were human, but further identification would take time. The investigation was ongoing, and they were looking into Tom's background more extensively. I moved out of that apartment as soon as I could, unable to shake the horror of what I had found. Max, my loyal companion, finally seemed to calm down once we left. This experience left a lasting impression on me. I learned to trust my instincts and to be wary of deals that seem too good to be true. So, to Tom, the deranged man with the free couch, I hope you stay far away wherever you are. And to anyone reading this, please, be careful with dealing with strangers online. You don't want free human bones. Hello everyone, I'm Emma. I'm a 29-year-old single mom living in a small town in Pennsylvania. My son, Ethan, is 3 years old and is the absolute light of my life. Since Ethan's father left us shortly after he was born, it has just been the two of us. I don't have any family nearby. My parents passed away years ago, and my siblings live across the country. So when it comes to babysitting, I rely heavily on a reputable agency to find babysitters when I need them. I work from home most of the time, which allows me to be with Ethan, but occasionally I have to go out to meet clients in person. These meetings are crucial for my job, and canceling them often isn't an option for me. This particular situation arose when one of my regular clients scheduled a last-minute meeting. It was an important one, and I couldn't afford to miss it. I contacted the babysitting agency that I usually use, and I managed to book a babysitter for that evening. The agency has always been reliable, and I've never had any issues with their sitters. However, about 2 hours before the meeting, I received a call from the agency. The babysitter they had assigned to me had a family emergency and they couldn't make it. They were incredibly apologetic and assured me that they would find a replacement immediately. But after 20 minutes of waiting, I got another call. They didn't have any other sitters available on such a short notice. Panic began to set in. I couldn't cancel the meeting. It was too important. Desperate, I started calling friends and acquaintances. I even tried my neighbors, but no one was available. I was running out of options fast. In a moment of desperation, I turned to Craigslist. I know. Craigslist isn't exactly known for being the safest place to find a babysitter, but I was out of options. I scrolled through several ads, and one caught my eye. Experienced babysitter available. References upon request. The ad seemed legitimate enough. The poster, who identified herself as Kelly, claimed to have years of experience and also provided a phone number. I decided to take a chance and called her. Kelly answered on the second ring. She sounded friendly, maybe a bit too eager, but I was in no position to be picky. I explained my situation, and she assured me that she could be at my house within half an hour. I asked for the references, and she gave me a few names and numbers. I quickly called one of them, and it checked out. They gave a glowing review of Kelly, so I decided to go ahead. And true to her word, Kelly arrived about 30 minutes later. She was in her late 30s with a friendly enough appearance. But as soon as she stepped inside, I felt an odd sense of unease. She was dressed a bit too formally for a babysitting gig, and her smile seemed forced. I pushed my discomfort aside and I showed her around the house, pointing out where Ethan's things were and also explaining his bedtime routine. Kelly listened intently, but she also kept glancing around the house, almost like she was assessing it. It was really unsettling, but I just tried to stay calm. Ethan, usually very sociable, seemed hesitant around Kelly. He clung to my leg and didn't want to let go. This was very unlike him, and it just added to my growing unease. As I was explaining the rules and instructions, I noticed a few things that set off alarm bells to me. Kelly's responses were either overly enthusiastic or strangely vague. When I asked her about her previous babysitting experience, she mentioned working for several families, but was oddly reluctant to share specific details. Then, she did something that sent a chill down my spine. While I was talking, she reached out and touched Ethan's hair, almost petting him. Ethan recoiled, and I felt a surge of protectiveness. Something about the gesture felt off, almost predatory. I decided to test her a bit. I remember asking her, Can you tell me about the family you worked for last week? Kelly hesitated. Then she gave a vague answer that didn't quite sit right with me. It was along the lines of, "Oh, they were lovely. Two kids, very well behaved. I can't remember their names right now, but the parents were doctors, I think." My heart started racing. She didn't mention specific names or details, which was strange for someone who claimed to have years of experience. My gut was screaming at me that something was wrong. I knew that I couldn't leave Ethan with this woman. I apologized and told Kelly that I had changed my mind and that I wouldn't need her services after all. Her reaction was immediate and alarming. Her friendly demeanor vanished, replaced by a cold, almost menacing stare. She said, "You're canceling on me now? After I drove all the way here?" I remember feeling protective but also very apologetic because I do understand her part, and I think I told her, "I'm really sorry, Kelly, but I don't feel comfortable leaving my son right now. I'll pay you for your time, but I would need you to leave." Kelly didn't budge. She stood there, glaring at me, and I felt a rising sense of panic. I went to another room with Ethan, and I grabbed my phone, discreetly dialing 911. I was explaining the situation to the dispatcher in a hushed voice. They assured me that the officers were on their way. When Kelly realized that I was on the phone with the police, she exploded. She said, "You're calling the cops on me? For what? Trying to help you?" She was shouting as she was taking a step closer to me. I held my ground with my heart pounding in my chest. "Please leave," I said firmly, clutching Ethan tightly. Just then, I heard the sound of police sirens. Kelly's eyes widened and she muttered something under her breath before storming out of the house. I locked the door behind her with my hand shaking. The police arrived moments later and I explained everything to them. They took my statement and reassured me that I had done the right thing by calling them. They also advised me to be more cautious about who I hire in the future and just to stick to reputable agencies, even if it's inconvenient at times. After the police left, I called my client and I explained the situation. Thankfully, they were incredibly understanding and agreed to reschedule the meeting. They were parents themselves and understood the lengths that we would go to protect our children. I was shaken but relieved. I couldn't believe how close I had come to potentially putting my son in serious danger. The whole experience left me feeling paranoid. Looking back, I realized how dangerous it was to turn to Craigslist in my desperation. It's definitely a lesson that I won't forget. I have since reconnected with a few distant relatives and also built a stronger support network to avoid ever being in that situation again. And to all the parents reading this, please, be careful when hiring someone to take care of your kids. Trust your instincts and don't let desperation cloud your judgment.
Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate it. I would also like to give some extra love to my Patreon members, my channel members, and also my tippers. Thank you so much. If you would like to extend a little bit more support for the channel, don't forget to leave a like and a comment down below. If you would like to become a Patreon member, a channel member, a tipper, or even to buy merch, check out the links in the description below. Again, thank you. And I hope you stay scared because your fear feeds me.